All right, we are live.
Excellent.
Belle, why don't you take a moment to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. I'm Belle Walker of Bellevue Consulting. We take clients from friction to function. That means we enable teams to work together for their operations to scale, expand, run smoothly. Not talking about the interpersonal or intrapersonal development, not talking about the goals, talking about the structures and processes that bind those two together and make those goals achievable.
Cool. Well, structures and processes, that's what we're here to talk about today. In particular, Belle and I are going to go through 8 checks, 8 kind of structural diagnostics, perhaps, that you could run, 8 structural tips to help you ensure that you have the structure in your company to hold up. And in particular, to dodge the great resignation, to perform really well. I am Aaron Schmuckler. I do these things. I've been doing them about once a week for a while, and so I'm excited to be here, and I'm excited to have all of you who are watching. We're going to keep our eyes on the chat, so feel free to drop us a line. We will try to answer any questions that you may have. Again, I'm Aaron Schmuckler. I'm a company culture engineer, founder with my business partner Adam Utley of the Yes Works, where we help you engineer the culture that you are looking to, one where people and profits both thrive. So, Belle, we've each come with 4 suggestions, 4 ways that leaders can look at the structures in their company and assess whether they are up to the challenge. Right? And I'm up here in Tacoma, where there's a bridge called Galloping Gertie, right? Or it was called Galloping Gertie, the Tacoma Narrows Bridge. And in the 1950s, they built this bridge, and then the wind came along and made the bridge undulate until it collapsed under its own weight and the vibrations caused by the wind. We want to help you make sure your company doesn't go the way of Galloping Gertie. So, Belle, why don't you tell us the first of your 4 structural checks to make sure that your bridge is sound?
Yeah, well, the first one is gonna sound incredibly basic, but I promise there's a little more to it, and that is just making sure that you have a structure that connects all of the pieces of your
Mm.
organization. Right. First and foremost, that bridge is doing nobody any good if you have one end over here and one end over here, and they never actually fully connect.
That reminds me, maybe you've seen these photographs and memes, right? Of them, they've been building this bridge, and you can see that they're not actually headed toward the same spot. And you see some construction people on one side and some construction people on the other side, and they are looking out over a precipice, each of them, because the bridge hasn't been built.
It's easy to think that this is straightforward and simple, right? If you've got structures in your organization, you've got structures in your organization, right? How
Mm,
hard is this, right? My product management team has a structure. My
mm,
engineering teams have a structure. Sales has a structure. Do they actually connect in any way? Does your organization have a structure? Are they well enmeshed together? So even just understanding first and foremost, can you view your organization cohesively from top to bottom is really the first tip because it is harder than it sounds.
yeah, and I'm picturing again. I'm picturing the sky bridges between buildings. And so I'm imagining that part of what you're addressing here, Belle, is the silos that we hear about. So if I'm the CEO of an organization and I'm looking and I see I have a marketing department and I have a, a coding department, what is it that I need to be looking for? How can I answer the question, do I have these departments integrated or don't I?
Yeah, honestly, this is one of those situations where you probably need more than one perspective.
Mm,
So, taking both of those examples that you gave, right, the bridges that were coming together but actually slightly offset, somebody far away at the right angle Probably, I mean, I imagine there's all sorts of fun photography tricks you can play to make it look like those bridges are perfectly aligned. And one of the challenges leaders have is they only have one perspective.
Mm-hmm.
There's a fabulous graphic I love of a monkey sitting at the top of a tree, and then there's monkeys all over the tree. The question is, what do you see if you're at the top of the tree and you look down? You see smiling monkey faces looking up at you.
Uh-huh.
What do you see if you're on the bottom branches of the tree? You see a bunch of monkey butts. It's all the
Different.
same thing.
That's a different view.
It is, and so if you really want to know, are all of the elements of your organization connected? Start with your perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Can you draw a full tree? But then you also need to start asking people at different levels of the organization and in different branches of the organization whether they feel connected. Can they explain the connections? And
Mm.
I would say both of those. Those are not different ways of phrasing the same question, because again, you can feel connected, and then when you try and dig into the details, realize, oh, I have a delightful feeling of connection, but no idea how I actually get a hold of product.
Yeah. So there are some things you can listen for. Things like, why didn't I know this? Right? If you hear people asking, why didn't I know this sooner? Then very
Yep.
likely you've got some of that siloing going on. If you hear people saying, why did you do it like this? There's a very good chance that you've got some of this siloing going on, that your teams aren't integrated in such a way that information is flowing before decisions are made and before action is taken. And you can get ahead of some of this, right? I mean, right now we're talking about all the lagging indicators, right? Some of the things that, we're in trouble. Asking people, how are you going to make this decision? How are you going to know whether this is working? What did the folks in engineering say when you brought this to them? When is your next meeting with the folks in engineering? Asking these questions can help you diagnose in advance whether you've got the kinds of connections that Bell is suggesting.
Which I think is an excellent then uh, turning point to say, Aaron, what would you bring as your first tip for
All
today?
right. So Bell is talking about organizational structure. I'm also going to go right into the kind of the more obvious tangible elements of organizational structure. And this one is really very simple. All you need to do is pull up an org chart to run this diagnostic. And here's the diagnostic. How many people do you have reporting to one single manager? And if you have more than 6, maybe 8 people reporting to one single manager, then you've got a structural problem. Because science has demonstrated that one manager, a skilled manager, can effectively manage up to 8 people. Now, this is if you presume, as I do, that a manager is responsible essentially for 2 things. They're responsible for the performance of their team, and they're responsible for effective working relationships with each of the people who report to them, which leads to things like great performance and also talent retention. So talent retention and relationships are inextricably together. And I had a CEO once come to me and say, I've got great people on my front lines. I've got absolutely fantastic people managing them. And what I don't understand is why there's so much animosity. And the reason that I discovered was that there are these well-meaning and high-performing managers are working to drive performance, as well they should, with the people who report to them. And there are upwards of 12, 15 people reporting to one manager. So the manager is driving performance without the kind of trust that comes with a great relationship. And so what you end up with is this animosity because there is an imbalance in those relationships. So the diagnostic, how many people do you have reporting to one manager? If you've got more than 6, maybe 8 people reporting to one manager, then that is a structural flaw that may lead to a little galloping Gertie.
And that plays very directly into one of the tropes from Silicon Valley that drives me bonkers, which is the notion that the best organizations must be flat,
Mm,
very flat.
mm,
And that 6 to 8 can sound very small and make it seem like your organization is going to get very deep very quickly.
mhm.
And this is, I think, a good time to nerd out a little bit on some math and talk about just how many people per layer that
Ah,
enables.
okay.
Because if you've got, let's say one CEO,
Yep.
not necessary, but so let's say we have one CEO who has 6 direct reports,
Yep.
who each have 6 direct reports,
Okay.
who each have 6 direct reports.
Yeah.
Do you remember off the top of your head what
So
six
that's, I
times
think you just
36
went
is?
it through 4 layers, including the CEO at the top. So you've
Yep.
got 6, and then 36, and then whatever 36 times 6 is.
Turns out to be 216. So when we add in that 36 and our 6 and our 1, we are over 300 people.
With just 4
Or sorry,
layers,
we're
including the,
almost 300 people. Almost 300 people with those 4 layers, where one layer is if we
is
ignore the CEO
the
for a
CEO.
moment,
Right.
it's effectively 3 layers.
Yeah. So we've got the C-suite, we've got VPs, and we've got or directors, and we've got people reporting to them.
Right.
Okay.
And
So now I know them because we're dealing with exponential growth here. Let's go one more layer, which my math brain won't hand us, but that 200 and
that
whatever it was.
216 times another 6 is 1296.
Okay, so now we're talking orders of magnitude bigger
Right.
at just one more layer. So
Right.
effectively, we're talking about 4 layers of an organization gives us over 1,200 people. So we are not talking about building a ridiculously deep organization.
Right.
And we're also not talking about what the authority structures look like. And I won't. I've got another one of my bullets coming later that can help to effectively squish the layers of your organization. But with
Yep.
that, Bell, what's your second tip for our listeners?
Well, my second tip is very closely related to this one, which is to say not just the span of control, but to dive a little deeper into that almost throwaway comment you made about if you assume the role of a manager, a leader is. And it's to ask how much pressure, how much weight, how much burden are you putting on each node of that organization?
Hmm.
How overloaded are your managers? One very significant factor is going to be, are your managers having too large a span of control, too many people reporting to them? But what else are you asking them to do? Are
Hmm.
your managers mentoring, educating, leading, and project managing, and dealing with budgets and overseeing? My experience has been that particularly in larger companies, we start to pile more and more responsibility onto these frontline and mid-level managers, as opposed to having a separate tech lead or a separate project manager. At
Hmm.
big enough scale, you start to get those roles, but then it's really, especially those frontline managers, tend to end up with some degree of responsibility across a huge span of role scope, not just
Hmm.
leadership team size.
So if the question is, and I think it's a fantastic question, how much pressure is on any individual manager? Well, that's a great question. How do we get the answer?
So often, even just asking the question, what are my managers expected to accomplish
Mm,
for their team, is just a very straightforward place to start. Chances are good as a leader or senior leader, you know in your head what all those things are, but have you actually seen it as a list?
mm,
Um,
yes.
because the
Wow,
way
what a
our brains
powerful.
work, it's very easy to say, oh, they just have to do these couple of things. But when you start actually writing it out, and so circling back to the specifics of, you can pick a couple of managers and say, what are all the things this person needs to be doing to be
Mm.
successful in this role.
And I can hear you, by the way, leaders who are watching, going, I don't have time for that.
Uh,
Awesome. That's fun. I'm glad to hear you say that, even though I didn't hear you say that, right? I'm glad to hear you say that you don't have time for this, because you're absolutely right. Ask for your managers to give you a list,
yes.
right? Hopefully you're already doing one-on-ones. So give them a couple of weeks. Say, in our one-on-one that's coming up, let's be let's be honest, we're right up against holidays. That's coming up, say the second week in January. I would just like to see a list of the things you're responsible for. And just looking at that together may give you tremendous insight into whether or not your managers are overloaded. Any other thoughts for the folks, Bell, about how to assess whether your managers are overloaded? Because if I reported to you, Bell, and you asked me, hey, can you handle your workload? My answer is going to be, yep, yes, boss. I can handle my workload. So how can we know?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, asking a question like, "Can you handle your workload?" This is a little more in your territory than in mine, but I think probably everyone watching goes, "Yeah, that's not a helpful question."
Right.
So starting with ways to phrase the question, right? What is the full list? What are your priorities, right? What I want,
Mm,
asking for a stack ranked list. The other place I would look is if you have historic promotion criteria or promotion data. What were the things that the leaders who were promoted did well?
mm,
Because one of the things I often see is a discrepancy between what that full list of things you're asking people to do, the priorities and the specific rewards don't always, or reward criteria don't always line up
great.
perfectly. And the less alignment you have, the more pressure the leaders are under because they have a very long list. They're being told that these are the top priorities. They're being rewarded based on these other elements.
Mm.
The most common example is being told the top priority is career growth mentoring for your team and promotion. Like, I'm just going to call that
Yeah.
out
No,
bluntly,
it's
right?
not.
Promotions being based on business rewards. And so if the
Yeah,
messaging is promotions are based on business rewards, um, but your top priority is to care and mentor your team, that is right there going to be a quick recipe for a little bit of potential overload.
great. So let me bring a bit of a little truth bomb in here, and this is going to come as no surprise to anybody. Nobody, and this is not a universal truth. Of course, you're going to find exceptions. Nobody is getting to everything on their list. So you're not looking for, does this person have a list that they can complete? Because of course, you and I and Bell, we all have things on our list that we're not getting to, things that get pushed off and pushed off and pushed off because they're not the priorities. So asking questions like, okay, of course, and this is, you're setting the expectation. Of course, you're not getting to everything that you're responsible for. That's a given. I'm not getting to everything that I'm responsible for as your boss. And so my question for you is, given that you're not, of course, getting to everything that's on your list, what that you think is important are you not getting to? And so you're getting a list, not just a complete list, but also a list of where do they feel the rub. And so then you can work with them to determine whether things that are mission critical are falling away, whether there are misalignments of priority, that they should be shifting things down in favor of other things, or whether some of uh, what they are doing, like they're doing everything that their priorities are straight, and things that are business priorities aren't getting handled. Now you know that you're in a tough spot. And we've got somebody on Facebook, we don't know who, because it doesn't tell us. The average person is 350 hours behind, and I don't know where that statistic comes from or whether it's exactly correct. But if
But as
I
long as
think
it's the
about
right 350 hours,
that's
it's less
yes,
concerning.
yeah,
Chances are good, though, that there's something important in there. Oh, thank you,
uh,
Karen.
Karen, thank you for identifying yourself. So now we know who to thank for that bit of, I almost called it trivia, but it's not. It's not
Insight.
trivia that the average person is 350 hours behind. And as long as you're getting to the stuff that you, as the decision maker for this moment, uh, believe and have decided are essential, are critical, no problem, right? Because we've already determined everybody's behind. It's just a question of, are you behind on things that you can afford to be behind on?
And does that happen to lead into your second tip for us, Aaron?
In a way, I would say it does, because one of the things that managers, anybody in authority is doing is they're making decisions, right? People come to, hey boss, I need your input on this. Hey boss, I need your thoughts on that. So my second bit of diagnostics, or my second tip, is to push decision making down the org structure. So um, what commonly happens is that at the top we're trying to reach down to the people at the front lines, and we're trying to drag up the information that they have to the level of decision making. And this is incredibly challenging to do, because we all played telephone when we were in kindergarten. We know that when we're every time there's a transfer of information, there's a loss of fidelity in that information. And so the decisions that are being made at the top are being made with imperfect, incomplete, flawed information. And then those decisions are pushed down. So that really slows down the engine of your machine, your company. And it also makes your decisions poor. Now, one of the places that people resist pushing decision making down, in other words, I can think back to working when I worked in a restaurant. I've worked in a few different restaurants as a bartender, as a bar manager, as a server. And we've all been to restaurants and had less than stellar service or less than stellar meal. And sometimes when you complain, the waiter says, the server says, just a moment, let me go talk to my manager. And then they come back with the manager's decision. And sometimes they say, you know what? I'm sorry, I'm going to make it right. Can I give you dessert on the house? So that's a really easy distinction that we can make, right? Is as a server, when I was able to say, you are right, this is not right. We as a company are going to make this right for you. I am going to buy you dessert. Right? I, as a representative of the company, I'm going to give you dessert as a way of compensating for your less than stellar experience. That's an example of pushing decision making down. Now, this is great because it leads to quick decision making. It's great because it leads to satisfied customers. It's great because it leads to good decision making. And I can hear some of you saying, but the people at the front lines don't have my judgment. And you're absolutely right. Right? I bought dessert for people that the manager said, don't do that again. And I learned from it. So the manager gave me input once instead of making 5 decisions. Gave me input once, and my judgment was improved. So this is the bad decisions that come from pushing decision making down. They're inevitable, and they are an incredible investment in the judgment capacity of your organization. Now, I've talked a lot.
Well, but I think that also comes back to your first tip around what is the difference between the 6 and the 8, right? And I would argue that one of the
Exactly.
key differences is going to, or where can you handle 4 at a max? One of the things that's really going to come down to that limit of reasonable span of control is how much time you have to spend making decisions versus, I'm going to use some, so I completely agree with what you're saying. So I'm going to use a little bit of harsh terminology to kick off a devil's advocate and then argue with the devil's advocate,
All right.
which is that so basically what that does is put the manager in the position of cleaning up mistakes as their primary role, and I'm actually totally in favor of that. Right. I think because most employee, your goal, and if you're really trying to grow and develop someone, is to help them be more effective and make better decisions, make better judgment, provide that input so that there's not that much to clean up.
Hmm.
But that is part of where you have that support, that resource, where being that
Absolutely.
leader comes in. And so, yes, it means that your job is then to just keep an eye out for the times it went wrong and go clean it up. And that is going to be so much less work than doing it your darn self.
Great. So right, and this is part of what you're pointing at is uh, we were talking about the different the tension between wanting to have flat organizations and the need for organizational layers and structure. Right. So what one of the things that happens when you push decision making down is that while you may have layers, you don't have the altitude. So it's a flatter organization by having thinner layers, right? You can think of a a wedding cake, right? It has a few layers and a lot of altitude, where baklava has a lot of layers but not that much altitude. So when you push decision making down, and when you push status, the authority to make decisions is a form of status. When you push that status down, then you get a flatter organization, despite the fact that you may have more layers than you were thinking might be ideal.
Definitely want to adopt the terminology of, are you a wedding cake or a baklava?
It's yours. Go for it. We can share it.
Awesome.
All right, Belle. So that brings us, I think, to your number three.
Yeah, so my number 3, I think will continue to enhance some of this decision making. It's supplements how do you go about actually pushing that authority
Mm,
down. I'm going to come back to that friction versus function and say you need to have some touch points with minimal friction. And I'm about to use a
mm,
scary word that I know you're going to have lots of thoughts on, which I'm excited about: meetings. Right? That there need to be, not infinite by any stretch, but a certain subset of regularly scheduled touch points.
mm,
Often that's going to be most effective in the form of an effective meeting, and I'll let you speak to how you make the meetings effective, but having them there, right? Having that, even coming back to this notion of a one on one. I never minded having one-on-ones with my teams where we sat down for 5 minutes and said, we don't need the rest of this half hour.
mm,
Have a good one.
mm,
But I avoided so many issues by just saying, hey, what's up? And
mm.
they say, oh, no, nothing's going on. You sit there for 60 seconds and say, really? And at the end of the 60 seconds, which feels like forever, oh, well, there is this one thing that if
Yeah, and
we
that
had
one
the
thing turns out to be mission critical, right?
right, and it's not, it's almost never something that they would have brought to me because
Mm,
it was an acute pain, but it allowed us to address things before the acute pain, and I think most people can resonate with that on a one-on-one level, but the same thing is true at an organizational level. So coming
mm,
back to that question of, my product team and my engineering team, well, when were you going to tell them, right? How much of a threshold, how much of a barrier is there between having information and sharing the information? Do I have to take it on myself to set a meeting, to write the email, or is there just a time where I'm going to be sitting in the room with the right people and asked, hey, is there anything I need to know? Because
ah,
one of those is much more likely to pull that information out of me than the other.
there's so much good in what you just said, and I'm just going to highlight the silence for a moment, right? The minute of silence that you brought up, and and this, if you've been paying attention to me for any amount of time, I'm going to say you've got to be having weekly one-on-ones, 30 minutes with every single one of your direct reports without fail. It's sacred time. So I'm thinking of a podcast, and I don't remember which one that I was listening to recently, and they were talking about asteroids and the near misses and the asteroids that NASA and other organizations around the world are tracking. The ones that might come wishing past, like a bullet whizzing past our ears. And we're talking about these near misses that are some years off in the future, or these maybe not near misses. And what are we going to do? How can we launch something off the face of the planet to go intercept this asteroid? And what you're talking about, that silence of 60 seconds, waiting, saying, really? There's nothing on your mind? And 60 seconds later, they say, well, there is this. The reason they didn't bring it up is that it's not looming large like tomorrow's deadline. Tomorrow's deadline is what's on their mind, and they want to get the heck out of your office. If they want to get the heck out of your office, so they can go deal with tomorrow's deadline. And by having that one-on-one and giving those 60 seconds, what you get the opportunity to hear about is the looming asteroid that's weeks, months, maybe even years away. And how many times have you, as a leader, I'm talking to you, how many times have you as a leader said, why didn't I know about this sooner? And one of the reasons that you may not have known about this sooner is you didn't do what Belle just suggested, having that one-on-one with the opportunity for silence. And I know one-on-one is just one of these things that you're talking about, that you're calling regular structured checkpoints.
Frictionless communication opportunities.
Yeah. And it's frictionless because it's on the calendar, regular and repeating, right? Anytime you have to make an appointment, that's got friction. Theseus Robinson would like me to publish the podcast title if I can think of it. And Theseus, I will, and pardon me if I'm mispronouncing your name, I will do that if I think of it, because it was a fascinating listen.
Awesome. All right. So what's number 3 on your list, Aaron?
Number 3 on my list, again, this is a one of the more kind of difficult, esoteric, maybe kinds of diagnostics. But it's to investigate your company for gaps in integrity, and in particular, gaps in integrity between values and policy. So one concrete example that I can give you is a company, and there are tons of them, that have as one of their core values trust. And then when you crack open the employee handbook, you might learn something like, if you take bereavement leave, please come back with an obituary or a death certificate. Now, if there's anything that says trust, like prove to me that your loved one died, I don't know what says trust better than prove to me that your loved one died.
Ooh, but can I share a counter example?
Yes, you may.
This is from a colleague I respect deeply. She started her career at HP, and she was a technician. When she started there, she was introduced to the tool closet. This was a large tool closet with some very expensive tools in it and no lock on the door. There had been a lock on the door, and a sufficiently senior leader, I'm going to just decide this was one of the co-founders, walked by and said, why is there a lock on this? We say we trust our employees. This lock does not show that we actually trust our team.
Bravo. One of the things that's, and the diagnostic that I'm giving you, compare your values to your policies and procedures, goes beyond trust. But we'll stick with trust for the moment. When I was in high school, we got the message, do not cheat. We are watching you like hawks. We are going to keep our eyes open for any bit of cheating. And if you cheat, we will know, and you will fail. Right. I mean, and then they did. We all know the high school teacher, who kind of watch and keep your eyes on your paper, right? That kind of stuff. I went to a parochial school. We're supposedly a bunch of, moral people. Everybody cheated.
I found some brilliant ways to do it, I'm sure.
Everybody cheated. It was a game, right? It was, yes, we employed all of our creativity, all of us, to figuring out how can we cheat and get away with it, even when we didn't necessarily need to. Right? It wasn't a question of I don't know this information. It was more a question of, in this cat and mouse game, can we win?
And meanwhile, I went to schools that went more of the we just expect you not to cheat, and man, are we going to be disappointed in you
Yes.
if you get caught.
Yeah. By contrast, when I went to college at Oberlin, the there was an honor code. You don't cheat, right? That's essentially the honor code. And professors were not permitted to be in the exam room. They come in, they give you the exam, they answer any questions that you have at the beginning, and they leave the room. That's the rule. And at the end of your exam, you say, you write, I have neither given nor received aid in this exam, and you sign it. In 4 years in that institution, I never, not once saw people cheating. So there's a way that we humans like to live up to or down to the expectations that are set for us. So if you are sending the message that you expect people not to be trustworthy, then they'll say, okay, why should I bother being trustworthy? And by your example, Belle, when you tell people, hey, inherently I trust you, you are trustworthy, then they're much more likely to live up to that trust.
Yeah, and the real challenge comes when the first person breaks that trust. How do you respond? Because that's often how those policies come into play. And yes, we're just reiterate,
Yes.
this is more than trust, but this will apply to pretty much everything. You have a choice to ask as an organization, do we continue to commit to trust, or do we start implementing all these policies? And so this is a check that needs to happen over and over again, because it's very rare in those moments of tension and pain that you really have the bandwidth, emotional, intellectual, to think about that bigger picture. And so this is not a question of, did you have the right intentions? Did you originally create the correct policies? This is an ongoing self check of, have circumstances guided me all unknowing to a point of contradiction?
I love it. So, and so we're all not talking only about the core values. We're also talking about kind of the more innate, unspoken values. Things like, hey, Belle, we hired you because of your judgment, right? And so how many employee handbooks have grown and grown and grown by aggregation of a policy put into place so we never have to deal with that crap again? People are full of crap. And I say that with all the love in the world. I'm full of crap. So writing policies to address missteps is not a way to build structures that will survive. It is your company will collapse under the weight of unnecessary policy aggregation. So a quick example before I turn to you, Belle, for your final bullet point. Mary Barra became the CEO of General Motors. And when she arrived, there was something like a 36-page dress code, right? But we can probably imagine aggregated over time. It wasn't the first dress code that they had. It aggregated over time to become 36 pages. Now I ask you, who read them? Anybody? Anybody in the whole organization read 36 pages about dress code?
I'm sure there were a handful, and let's not make them feel bad about being those people.
Fair enough. Yes, there were a small handful of, in the disc profile, the C's who read those 36 pages, and God bless you in all truth, because I don't have the patience for that stuff. And so I really, really have been grateful in my career for the people who do. It would not surprise me if Mary Barra herself did not read those 36 pages. And what she did was she extracted those 36 pages of dress code and she replaced them with 2 words: dress appropriately. That is a simple, elegant structure that's going to require feedback and discussion, which, by the way, are the building blocks of great relationships, which also, by the way, is going to help you retain talent through this great resignation. So strip out complex BS policies in favor of simple, elegant policies that are not foolproof, but instead are part of the design of weeding foolishness out of all of the people in your organization, yourselves included, right? These policies, these discussions help make us less foolish. Belle,
All
bring it
right.
home.
So for my fourth tip, I'm going to circle way back to the beginning where we're talking about structures and that connection, sort of largely from a looking down, sanity checking from different directions. The fourth tip, though, is coming back to that avoiding the great resignation. And the tip I have is make sure there is a clear path and progression for the people looking up in their careers, that they can see how roles, jobs evolve over time, separate from the retirement or moving on of the people above them. I worked with a company recently that had a one-to-one ratio of job descriptions to employees. There's there's some lovely things about that. Everybody knew exactly what their job description was. However, it made it basically impossible for anyone entering the company to say, what does my career look like here? Because I'm not going to be Aaron. I'm not going to be Karen, right? And so if the roles, if there's no clear growth path for me to map to looking up, that's one of those factors that's going to cause people to look somewhere else.
I love it. And you're talking about looking up, right? I want to be able to look up and see where I'm headed. And that's true for a lot of people, right? Some people don't want to look up. They want to look somehow sideways. And so we
Yeah.
come back to the one-on-ones, right? Really, and the relationships, really knowing where would Belle like to be headed and what is the path here for where Belle wants to be headed, which may be different from where Aaron wants to be headed, which may be different from where Theseus wants to be headed, and different from where Karen wants to be headed. So if you're at the top of your organization as the CEO, you can't know all that stuff. But what you can do is, through the layers of your organization, set the expectation that managers are going to know this stuff. And so we come back again to how many people are each of your managers managing? Because 15 people to know what are their career aspirations and how are they changing and evolving over the years. That is too tall an order, right? To come back to is their pressure appropriate? Knowing these details of what people aspire to is something that you can only do with a handful of people.
Well, and you also hit on such an important corollary. When in talking about in terms of the great resignation, some people want to look up. Some people are very happy where they are, and making sure that the pressure on them on all of these people is appropriate. Because man, some of those folks who have found the point in their career where they are comfortable and they kick butt and they have no interest in doing a darn thing higher on that org chart, they are jewels.
Yeah.
They can make entire teams so strong. They can be force multipliers. We can plumb the depths of engineering metaphors to describe them. And yet we constantly do exactly what I just did and nudge them, try to push them up some more. That's not helping anybody. So I would say understand first and foremost, are these people who want to be looking up the organization, up the career path, up their development growth in that direction? And if so, give them a clear path. And for the ones who are darned happy where they are, take advantage of their strength in place.
Well, Belle, before we get to my final, Belle, uh, remind people who you are and how will people know if they need you?
Ooh, yeah. So, Belle Walker with Bellevue Consulting, friction to function. And when I talk about friction, what that tends to mean is when you find yourself saying things like, "Man, I have growing pains. I mean, we were doing really great. The organization grew. Now everything hurts, and I don't really know more than that." That's a great time to give me a call. The other one is when you have clear goals, you were hitting them, and you start missing.
Mm.
Something's not working smoothly in the operation. Whatever industry that is, you've got a team of people trying to work together, especially when they get along very well. There's high trust, the interpersonal relationships are solid. That means you probably have a structural gap. And so, as you've probably picked up from the last hour, structures are my passion, and looking at organizations as systems is where I've spent some of my academic time and now my consulting career.
Terrific. And here we are on LinkedIn Live. So clearly people can find you on LinkedIn. You just heard Bellevue Consulting. Any other ways that people can get a hold of you that they should know about?
The website, and it's VIEW, my perspective, not the Y, especially for the Washington folks. BellevueConsulting.com and LinkedIn are probably the best ways.
Great. Before we get to my final thought, and this is a doozy, folks, about these 8 ways of checking your structure for effectiveness and for durability. I'm Aaron Schmuckler, co-founder and company culture engineer at the YesWorks. You can find us at theyesworks.com, and clearly you can find me here on LinkedIn. Here it is. We help people build systems of culture, because if you don't have a system, right, you've got a system for client onboarding. You've probably got a system for employee onboarding. You've got a system for how you produce your products or how you deliver your services. You've got systems for almost everything in your company, because you know if it isn't systematized, it isn't replicable, and it isn't scalable. So my final bit of culture diagnostics is, do you have a system for your culture? Smile Software is a client that reached out to us because they've got a fantastic culture as a small little company, and they are planning to grow exponentially over the course of the next few years. And they've got this fantastic culture, they say, by hiring well. And they know that's not scalable. So they've brought us in to help them create a system that is replicable and scalable for having an absolutely fantastic culture where people and profits both thrive. And so I know that's kind of abstract. So let me bring it into the real specifics. Do you have a system for management? This is how managers around here deliver consistent performance from their team, and how they deliver on those relationships and retention. If Joe is managing differently from how Betty is managing differently from how Kevin is managing, then this is not a systematic approach to management. And I bet you've got people with different teams delivering different levels of performance, and they have different levels of retention on their team. So you've really got to have a system for management. This is how we manage around here. And management style is something that you can overlay on top of a system. It is not a substitute for a system. Management is not something that you're born with. It's not a talent that you either have or that you don't have. It is a set of specific skills that are trainable, developable. And so that's my final bullet: is make sure you've got a system that is scalable and replicable for culture in general, and specifically for this is how we manage people around here.
And I would build on that, saying, Aaron, you describe yourself as a company culture engineer. I describe myself as an organizational efficiency engineer. And one of the key elements of what that engineering means is that there is not a one size fits
Mm.
all solution. but there are tried and true systems and approaches for finding the right solution. So I think it might be possible to hear this is how we manage around here and think, but don't different people need different types of support? And
Of
those are not
course.
mutually exclusive, right? You can have a system, you can have the guidelines, replicable, scalable, successful is going to have to take into account the unique needs and motivations of each individual on those teams. That in no way contradicts Aaron's fantastic final point that you need a system.
You need it. You need it. You need it. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. I thank you, Belle, for joining me.
This is great. Thanks for
This
inviting
was
me
great.
on.
We really, I think, magnified each other's input for the folks. Folks, you've got a few seconds left wherein you can drop a question or a thought into the chat if you'd like for us to address it. Belle, would you go through just kind of lickety split the 4 points that you made for the folks who maybe have joined us late? And then I'll do likewise.
Absolutely. First and foremost, if you're curious whether your structure can survive, check to make sure it exists and is complete. Does it actually connect all of the points you think it needs to connect? That was one.
Yeah, breaking down those silos and bridging the departments.
Number two, you've got a bunch of connection points. Let's imagine it as a trust where you've got connection points. Those are probably your managers. Do they have an appropriate load on them? Are they overloaded? Are you asking too much? Are there too many elements and responsibilities piled into any one of those connections? Number three was making sure you're reducing the friction to communication structurally, making sure that you have easy, regular touch points, not just in your one on ones, although that is probably the easiest context to think about it, but across your teams, across your stakeholders, so that that information flows often and easily. And last but far from least, making sure that you have appropriate growth paths for the people who want to grow, and you do not put an undue upward force on the folks who are quite happy where they are. Thanks.
Terrific. Okay, so my 4. How many people do you have reporting to one manager? Science says 6 to 8 is tops for effective management. Number 2, push decision-making down. You're looking to push decision-making down to the level where the information already exists, as opposed to trying to drag the information up to the point of decision-making. Number 3, check for integrity between your values and your policies and procedures. And integrity here, I'm meaning as consistency, that there's congruence, not integrity meaning do the right thing. That's a different kind of integrity altogether. And then lastly, do you have a system that is scalable, that is replicable for your culture generally? And specifically, do you have a system for this is how we manage people around here? And by the way, if you don't, that's a great moment to reach out to us at the YesWorks. We've just launched what we've brought to companies specifically before to train all of their managers. We've just launched kind of a little institute where we can certify your managers. If you want to send us a few, we'll put them in a cohort with managers from other companies, and they'll have an opportunity to learn a system that they could bring back to your company, and they'll have other managers from other companies that they can hash out the issues with in an environment that's safe, and where they've got peers. We all need peers.
We all need peers.
All right, let's leave it at that.
Perfect.
Belle,
Yeah.
this was a real treat. And you listeners or viewers, thank you so much for being with us.